So I'm just going to see if everything's gone live yet. I had a bit of an issue yesterday with the live stream. It was quite embarrassing. And it just goes to show that you really need to, stay on top of your game. Oh, yes. Yes, we are. We have done it. Excellent. So we're live on the tube. Let's see if we're live on here yet. I'm just going to check this one. We should be live on here as well. So just, bear with me while I do this. I'm assuming there's no one out here. I could be wrong. You could all be waiting for me. I could have everybody here. Oh, look, we are live. So what happened yesterday? Oh, it's so embarrassing. So I started everything and I'm watching the lines. The lines are bouncing just the way they're supposed to. It's all good. Except it wasn't. The lines that were bouncing were apparently for the speakers, which I didn't even know that I'd put them into the sources. And I ended up recording this whole spiel and no sound. The computer had updated overnight and Windows, in its infernal bloody wisdom, had cancelled everything. Nothing was working. And so, had to restart it again, redo some of the settings, but ended up getting it back. And I thought about doing the live stream this morning so that I could do today's today. And then I thought, no, we're just going to cover this one tonight. So what was I going to talk about? Well, there's the law and there's justice. And when you go to court, what you get is you get the interpretation of the law according to the evidence put forward. So if you or your lawyer forget to put forward critical evidence, that's a sad case of stiff shit. Because the judge hearing it or the magistrate hearing it can't rule on something that they don't know exists. And it can be hard to get evidence in front of the court. And sometimes it's a tactical decision by the legal team to not go one way, to, fight the case another way. And you can get sprung with it when, the legal team makes a decision that's a bit out of left field. So, that the law, practicing the law is an art form. You have to take a balanced view. You kind of have to pick your battles. You can't fight everything. The more arguments you put forward that don't join together as a cohesive whole, the harder it is for people to, really follow the story and, take your side for it. And judges have a particularly hard time when some people just put forward allegation. They put in, affidavits that are, 100 pages long over and over and over. And, they go off the reservation with just, saying things, but they don't have the evidence. And one of the things you have to do is you have to bring the evidence. And I mean, when there's fraud, that is really hard to do. How do you prove a fraud? And I think there should be no statute of limitations on fraud, because fraud is committed by people who hide everything from you. And by the time you've sort of start to become aware of the fraud, the time runs. No, because sometimes you still can't find the evidence. You sort of realise, and you've got some of it, But unless you get all of the evidence, you can't really do anything. And when the police won't investigate it and no one looks into it, the regulatory bodies just sort of shrug their shoulders and say, there's nothing we can do. It's... You don't often get justice. And the reason I was going to talk about it was I was running it through the lens of this the Craig McLachlan story. So those of you in Australia who know what this was all about, I might just make this a bit smaller on this side and pull it on that side of me. So Craig McLachlan, he's known worldwide, so no doubt you've heard of him, you know who he is. Australian actor and muso, been around for a donkey's age. He was the star of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and there were all these allegations made against him, and charges ended up being laid. And in December, he finally got the verdict, the judgment handed down, and the magistrate found him not guilty of the 13 charges in relation to all of these things that were said. And apparently everything went into overdrive. So, as you can tell with this headline, it was a bizarre interview. And if you manage to see it, Craig McLachlan is very emotional, and it's a really hard watch. But people were upset because he got to tell his side of the story, and some of it was a bit over the top in his reaction if you have no compassion for people. But I can tell you, I've been through court where we lost everything. The other side, being a bank, had all of the power. And, we lost everything, but it still wasn't as bad as what the legal system put him through. Now, do I know him? No. Am I a fan of his? No. The reason I want to talk about it is because when I was working as a lawyer, I have met men who ended up in jail because their ex-partner would say he did XYZ. He ended up, these blokes ended up being charged. They couldn't prove that they didn't do it, and their lives were totally ruined. And anybody who knows anything about the human condition would have to know that, these things happen. People do lie. I mean, they're now coming out with, more people have come out and said that he's done this. And, he wasn't charged with everything he did. And it goes on and on and on. And in my humble opinion, I don't think he could ever have had a fair trial here because it was trial by media. The media have been over the top with everything. And some of the things that were shown in the interview, I'm looking at that as someone who, for a very brief period of time, I was a defence lawyer in the criminal court, and I'm there. That's terrible that these people are doing that. You kind of wonder if any of that came out. I have downloaded the judgment, haven't got around to reading it yet because I ended up sorting out all sorts of technical stuff yesterday and this morning, and so I haven't got around to reading it yet. Judgments aren't always the best way of getting the gist of what's happened. I know that the judgment in our case, there were a lot of things that made it into the judgment that are factually incorrect. That's because our lawyer didn't put the factually correct stuff in front of the court, and some of it was just misremembered, or, perhaps in the writing and the editing something got lost. But for us, it's not quite such a biggie. I mean, it does make me look like a real dickhead, but, you get that on the big jobs. And the interview didn't really look good either, so taking everything into consideration, it wasn't a good look. But I've also been interviewed, and I'm not an actor or, have nothing going for me in that, kind of way. But I know that the interview that I gave and what ended up being shown on TV, not quite the same, because, they make editorial decisions on how we're going to put this together. And I know that a lot of the stuff that Craig did in that interview wasn't his idea. It was the producer saying, well, what we're going to do is we're going to do this. I think it's an unfortunate thing of how producers portray the news. Like some of it, I sort of cringed, because I don't think it is what Craig and his partner would have done ordinarily. I've got no evidence for that, obviously. I'm just, gut feeling is it was put together in that way to just sort of be a bit more dramatic. The story was dramatic enough anyway. The concerns that I had just from watching the interview, if I am to take the facts that were presented on Craig's side at face value, which I've got no reason not to, we had the interviews that the ABC did with the victims. We had photos of one of the victims with Craig and his partner taken after the events that she complained of, and there were text messages that were apparently sent after the events complained of. Now, I was once in a position where someone who was a friend overstepped the mark. There were two people that saw it who afterwards said, if you want to take this further, definitely a witness to it. I ended up reporting this friend to another friend who worked with him, and it was handled. But I never contacted this man again. I phoned my husband, told him what had happened, because he was a friend of ours. He wasn't my friend, he was our friend. And, sort of said, it's being handled, don't worry about it. And I'd actually gone home on the farm and I'd locked the gate, because I didn't want him to have the opportunity to just drive up and apologise or anything. I just didn't want to deal with him. And he didn't do as much as what Craig was accused of doing. It was, just verbal. But that my response was, I'm just not going to talk to this guy again. And yet you had a friend of Craig and his partner who apparently kept in touch, would talk. So to me, just seeing that being put forward, I wondered, what's going on? There's more to this than what we know. And then, of course, you sort of start to read all of these stories, like, all the viewers that were upset. Oh, yeah. They're upset that, he gets a chance to tell his story. And, they shouldn't have done it. He's a narcissist. And it's like, I'm not sure if you know what it's like after your life's been destroyed. I mean, I've got... So, that they're all posting on Twitter like, remember the magistrate's comments. She just said, look, she wasn't persuaded that there was collusion. She was not assisted by the line of questioning that, the reputations of the complainants, She's making comments that she wasn't persuaded. To me, that's not as big a deal as, what this person's making of it. But, it just seems really weird. It seems an over-the-top response. And I consider it the fallout for Craig McLachlan, because he hasn't worked in all that time. He was suing for defamation, which was all put on hold until the criminal matter was resolved. So I'm assuming that's going to go back on now. But they're still coming after him now. And that's what I see happening on a smaller scale with lots of men. And the only thing that these men seem to have done is they've left their partner, or their partner's left them, and there's something, there's a viciousness in family law that absolutely surprises me. I can't believe that people who loved each other enough to be in a loving relationship and have children end up being so god-awful when they break up. I don't get it. People who use children as weapons, I'm aghast that people do that. And as I said earlier, I know men who've gone to prison for things that they haven't done. I also know men who've gone to prison for things that they did actually do. And the hardest thing to always remember is that when somebody says, look, I know that you think that this person is really awful, but if you don't know them personally, if you don't personally know one of the people that it happened to, and you were there at the time it happened, and you sort of know what the reaction was, if you don't have personal knowledge of what's unfolding, it's a lot different than if you're there. I mean, if you're just reading everything and somebody says, oh, have you heard about this, and tells you what's happened, we do tend to get emotionally involved, and we do this thing where suddenly we're there, carrying on about it. Now, for me, the timing of all of the allegations first being made was a concern, because it came right on the Me Too movement, and it's like, I thought there's something going on there. And at this stage, I'd already been dealing with people who were facing serious consequences because somebody was making allegations about things that happened. And, they weren't going to the media because, small-time people, just a couple getting divorced, didn't have the media to run to. But they did run to the police. And, I mean, how many stories have we heard where, innocent men have been in jail rotting for years, and then suddenly the evidence turns up and they didn't do what they'd been accused of. And for everybody who's self-righteous, who might come across this, can you just for a minute, and I don't know what happened, I really don't. I just had red flags show up when I was initially watching all of this unfold, and when I watched the interview and they showed some of the evidence of what was happening at the time. So before you judge me and say, victim blaming, how about you consider what would happen to you if somebody made an allegation about you, said you did X, Y, Z, reported it to the police, or, told all of your friends everywhere. What would happen if you lost your job because of it? what would happen if you then faced criminal charges? Can you afford to get a good lawyer to represent you, or are you stuck with legal aid lawyers who are overworked, underpaid, busy? You know, there's so much. And, you know, legal aid is like, they don't represent you during trial, but you can get a lawyer who will get paid by legal aid to represent you. But I can tell you that they do not get paid what they would be paid for any other criminal matter. It's very, very little. It's for some lawyers, it's a third of what their normal hourly rate is. So there's a lot of lawyers no longer doing it. The ones that do are brilliant, but they're also, lawyers are busy. I know there were a lot of lawyers talking about getting out of offering legal aid altogether, simply because it's a rigmarole to be in the system, and, you know, it's a lot of work and the money's not there. And when you say the money's not there, it's other work that they can't take on. And a lot of criminal lawyers do civil as well, so, you know, they've got other things happening. Again, these are generalisations, wouldn't talk about any particular lawyer or law firm or legal aid in particular. This is just to sort of paint the bigger picture for you. You know, it's not easy being a defendant in a criminal trial, especially when you didn't do what you've been accused of. And when it's a case of, you know, he said, she said, how do you do that? Or he said, or she said, she said. I know of a woman who, you know, had taken on a boarder, and when the boarder moved out some 18 months later, she was supposed to be there for a month, stayed for 18 months. And when she left, she put in a claim to the family court and said, I know we were lovers and, you know, in a de facto relationship, blah, 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 blah. And in Western Australia at the time, you could already do that. And, yeah, she got a good settlement. And, you know, this woman who shall remain nameless has learned a very valuable lesson and will never ever help anybody again as long as her ass points to the ground. Because, you know, people do lie. Do I know if these women did? No, I don't. I wasn't there and don't know them. Wouldn't know them from a bar of soap. You know, how do you get on your high horse and just start hurling abuse, though? And that's what's happening. You know, Channel 7 has been hauled over the coals for daring to let a man who's been found not guilty on all charges, you know, how dare they let him speak? And I'm thinking, well, shouldn't he speak? Shouldn't he speak up for all the people who get falsely accused, whose lives are ruined? He didn't work for 3 years. It's a long time to be without income, especially when you don't know what's going to happen. It's just bloody hard. And people aren't taking that into consideration. His trial wouldn't have been cheap. It went for a bloody long time. There were lots of different hearings. Yeah, I don't have it up at the moment. But, you know, it just... It sends you nutty. I can assure you I went absolutely batshit crazy. Took me a long time to get some sense of normal again, and I'm not back to who I was. I will never be who I was. It is a bit of a concern. I might just shut that door. The boy's going off again. So he comes in and opens the door, and then he leaves and he doesn't shut the door. Just because he's a puppy doesn't mean he shouldn't know how to shut doors. Look, back to me being batshit crazy. And I hope you're not offended by cursey words. I do use them a lot. Look, it's just not easy. When your whole world is turned upside down, you do things that you would normally never consider. This judgment of the McLachlan judgment was handed down in December. We're now in May. I'm not sure when they would have done the interview. I imagine the interview would have been done probably mid-March. Yeah, possibly mid-March, maybe mid-April. You know, he hasn't had any recovery time. When we went through everything with the bank and, you know, we were sent to Perth in exile, I wasn't capable of doing anything. I mean, hubby was fine because he had work, so he wasn't fine, but he had work. He had to go to work, so he stayed working where he was, so he ended up being in the camp during the week, whereas, you know, before he used to come home every night, and then because we moved to Perth, he ended up having to go into the camp, and he's still at the same workplace now. You know, he took it in his stride, and he wrapped his head around things much, much quicker than I did. I mean, I remember it was 4 weeks after we moved to Perth. We're sitting on the sofa. He's just come back from work. We're sort of talking. And he looks at me and he says, you know, Rosie, it's really weird, but losing the farm's the best thing that ever happened to me, I reckon. And I looked at him and it's like, what? What's this? And he says, well, you know, all of the money we get, it's mine. I can spend it on what I want. I don't have to worry about fencing, you know. I go to work and when I come home, my time's mine. I don't have to worry about, you know, I have to go and feed the animals. I have to shear the sheep. I have to do this. I have to organise that. You know, it was like he was working 2 full-time jobs and I was working it. And, you know, we did a farm stay, which I quite liked. It was really good money. But you always had to sort of fit everything else around this job, and your home was essentially your job. Even now, I'm not at that stage where I think, yeah, it was a good thing. No, I would go back to the time. I can't go back and live there now because I just wouldn't fit in anymore. Couldn't do it. Wouldn't want to do it. You know, water under the bridge and all of that. But I know how long it took us. And, I mean, for the 3 years that it took us to put up the fight and actually sue the bank for damages, we were in this horrible, horrible place. And then once we sued the bank for damages, I think we settled within 3 or 4 months. You know, the bank settled it out of court. We got pitiful payment for it, but we weren't looking at the trial coming up. We weren't looking at any of that anymore. And I remember coming home after that, you know, the money was already in the bank because we didn't sign the papers until the money was in the bank. That's how much faith we had in the bank. So when we got home, it was like 3 weeks before I could think about anything at all. Now, I'm supposed to be studying. I was doing my bachelor's at that time. And it was just, it had gone on so long. I didn't know if I was Arthur or Martha. I just, you know, I'd wake up in the morning in a panic and then, oh no, it's over. No, it's good. It's over. It's settled. So the first 3 weeks were really horrible. I was a real mess. And I mean, we'd been paid some money by the bank. So, we're organising to buy a house and, all of the other stuff. But there was still that emotional fallout. And I tell you, I'm still crazy now. It changed me so much, and it changed me the most at the beginning. Now, whenever I see the word narcissistic, I always think, maybe that's my problem. Maybe I'm just a narcissist, and that's why it hit me so hard. Maybe that's why I couldn't get it together to deal with the bank, to deal with my son being so sick they thought he was going to die. They told us he was going to die. And dealing with the farm and dealing with all of the other problems that everybody else had. I went into this show and I didn't talk to people. And the trouble with the bank started really early, but nobody else knew because I didn't tell them. So I was doing things and I was already changing really early in the piece. But you sort of see it coming. And, with Craig, it was from the moment that the first allegation was made and the first story came out. That was his life falling apart. And, to live under that much stress for so long and, trying to survive all of that. I mean, how do you do it? You go crazy, or at least most of us do. So look, I got really upset with the response and people saying, they were irresponsible for airing the show, for interviewing him. Because to me, this is a man who wants to tell his side of the story. For years, all we've had is their side of the story. They were free to talk about it the whole time. And the media was free to pile on stuff the whole time. And he didn't have the right to speak. His partner didn't have the right to speak. And, everybody who says, you've got to believe the women. I love that line that his partner said where, believe me, I'm a woman. Believe me. I just thought it's a really good point. And, where they're saying, well, everybody's saying, of course, Craig is so, sounds so believable. He's an actor. And she says, well, they're actresses. So, what's the difference? And it's a valid point. Again, I don't know what happened, but I do know men who've been in jail for something they didn't do. I know women who've been in jail for things that they didn't do. You don't always get justice. It's just that the law can suck big time. One of my earliest things where I thought, this isn't right. I think, this just didn't happen the way that they say it did, is the Zaria Chamberlain saga where, everyone was accusing Lindy and priests, oh my God. Some of the churches, what they were saying. And I'm sitting back saying, this is at a time. And I mean, I'm only really young at that stage. And it surprises me to this day that I called that one. But it's like, why would a woman who wants to get away with murder claim a dingo stole her baby if in that time frame there were a lot of mothers who had killed their babies who got away with it because postnatal depression. And I don't know where the law sits on that one now, but during this time frame, it was a defence that a lot of women were using, and it sort of surprised me that she never ever said, postnatal depression. It was always, the dingo took my baby. And then, then years later, people are saying, a dingo tried to take my child. Dingoes just walk in and take whatever they want into camp because they're so used to people, they're not scared of them. And suddenly there's a different narrative happening. And I mean, that ruined their lives, ruined their kids' lives. Takes a long time to get over that kind of stuff. And, it's just, I think we need to grow up a bit and we need to stop putting the boot in. I'm not putting the boot into these women that accused Craig because I don't know what happened. I do know that I don't like what I've seen. I don't like the fact that one of them kept in touch and was a friend and maintained a relationship with Craig and his partner and then would turn around and do that. That just doesn't sit well with me. Right or wrong, I don't know, it doesn't sit well. It doesn't sound right. Some of the interview style didn't like it from the ABC interview with the accusers. There's lots of things that sort of make me think I really would need to know more. It's just, I don't know. It's really easy to sit back and put the boot in. But, everybody's got a right to defence and, he's got a right to tell his story now. Are they going to keep coming after him? I think that would have to be a concern for him. That, people are so bloody minded and bloody pig-headed. And, if we didn't get him then, we'll get him now. It just, I don't know. It's a part of humanity that I don't like. And I'm someone where someone I love dearly does say horrible things about me. I know that. There's nothing I can do about it. I do ask someone else who was there at the time, did I do that? Because I didn't think that's what I was doing. I don't remember any situation where I would have reacted that way or done this. And the person I ask always says, no, that's not what happened. That is so not what happened. Don't worry about it. There's someone else who's batshit crazy, apparently. But you really do start to wonder. And I mean, there's so much gaslighting going on. You sort of think, no wonder none of us know what to believe anymore. I used to always think that, if only I had enough knowledge, if only I could get more information, I'd be fine. And of course, now that we've got information overload with the internet and everything, and, if something happens in the news, I will invariably, that people think I'm interested in, I'll get a whole lot of text messages, I'll get Facebook messages, any way that people can get a hold of me. I'll be overrun with emails. It's not a lack of information that was my problem earlier. So, I don't know. Are we all a bit too picky? Or are we just not discerning enough with listening to both sides? As a lawyer, one of the things that you really have to remember to do is when you're working on a client's case, lawyers are supposed to look at the other side. And of course, when you first start working for a client, the lawyer won't have all of the information from the other side, won't have their story. So the theory of the case probably will change a lot as you get more information in. But you've always got to think about, well, if this is how we're doing this case, whether it's you're the defence or, you're the plaintiff, or, the plaintiff or the respondent, you have to think at all times, what's the other side? Because you've got to remember the other side is going to tell their story, and if they tell a more persuasive story, they win. And as I said earlier, it's often a matter of doing a tactical decision. Which battles are you going to fight? Which battles are going to give you the greatest reward? And there's a lot of talent that goes to making these decisions. That's why lawyers will get, they'll brief counsel to get counsel's opinion. If we do this, these are the facts, this is what we're thinking, this is the law that we've identified, what do you reckon? And, it'd be really handy if police were a bit more discerning with some of the charges they lay. I've seen some, and, why would the police have gone ahead with certain charges, and then I can't believe that the jury would convict when, obviously there's reasonable doubt. So, are they just not remembering that they're supposed to consider reasonable doubt? And some, one of the elements is missing. One of the elements of criminal offences, not all of them, but a lot of them, is intent. You've got to intend to do whatever it is. And, there's cases where there's obviously no intent, which is one of the critical things that the prosecution has to prove, that, the accused intended to do this, but they're still getting convicted, and it's like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. Are we just not thinking anymore? Are we at the stage in our society where we go into something with our mind already made up, and no matter what we're presented with, we don't change our mind? Look, if someone who knows one of these women saw this and decided to get in touch with me and said, oh, look, you really need to talk to so-and-so, she was one of the accusers, and she will convince you that it was true. And she'll, if she gets a hold of me and tells me her side of the story and, blah, 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 maybe I'd change my mind and say, oh, maybe the magistrate was wrong, maybe there was enough evidence to convict. But, from what little I've seen, and remembering I haven't read the judgment, it's quite a lengthy judgment, and I like to read them in one go, so I really needed to clear some time, and I just didn't do that today. I've seen the one interview, and I'd read some of the stories along the way. Even reading the stories along the way, I wasn't convinced. Once you start using emotive language with me, when you're telling me news, I tend to worry. If you're telling me what I'm supposed to think about someone, I don't like it. Give me the news. Don't give me the commentary. Just tell me what's happened. And I mean, I'm a great believer in innocent until proven guilty. And, I don't think anyone should lose their job over an accusation made in an interview. Did I think that Craig McLachlan should have been out of Rocky Horror? No, I actually didn't. Allegations were made. Kudos to him. I think he stepped down from memory. He wasn't sacked. I think he stepped back. I'm assuming that he thought it would be sorted really quickly. The innocence, the stupidity of innocence, and this is innocence in the way of until you've been in the legal system as someone who is, facing litigation, I don't really think you understand how long drawn out and how horrible it all is. It's just not a good place to be. And, he would have assumed it'll all blow over really quick and I'll be able to pick up my life and carry on. And that's not what happened, because everything got cancelled on him. And I don't like cancel culture. I've never really been a Rolf Harris fan. I haven't. I wasn't a great fan of his music. At one stage, I used to enjoy watching him do those quick paintings that he did, with the house paint, I think it was. Wasn't he didn't he used to do the ads for house paint, I think? British Paints sure can, I think. I'd watch them. But when suddenly they cancelled everything because he was sent to jail for what he did, I'm sort of there. Did it have value that we've now lost? If we're going to cancel everybody who's done something wrong, and I mean, what he did was bloody awful, but I still don't think that you should be rubbished for wanting to listen to his music. I mean, that doesn't affect me. I wouldn't have burnt any paintings of his. I just wouldn't have done that. It's like they're now cancelling all of the people out of history because, they dare to own slaves. And it's like, well, if you could afford it back then, you were allowed to. Are we going to cancel everybody in 10 years' time when, some bloody law changes, and what we're doing today, that's perfectly legal, acceptable, it's normal for us. In 10 years' time, we're going to say, oh, no, that's totally illegal. You cannot do that. Say Peter gets it up and they ban all dog ownership. Is all of your work going to be undone because suddenly you're on the wrong side of history? Suddenly you've done something in your past that was wrong. That, suddenly we've accepted that, the whole world must be vegan and, we cannot eat animals. So it's illegal. So, if you got your degree because your parents owned a farm and, sold all of these poor slave animals for human consumption, which is now illegal, therefore you get cancelled. That kind of thing. I think we're over the top with our responses. Do I think we should cancel historical figures for doing horrible things? Yeah, probably not. Should we stop writing about historical figures and remembering that in 50 years' time, some of the people we're talking about now will be historical figures as well? We don't know what's going to happen about any of this stuff. Is there going to be a revolution in the law because too many people are accused and, criminally charged and jailed for things that they didn't do because we're over-vigilant, because we're so hyper-vigilant that we see offence and drama and, I don't know the context of, this kiss where he apparently put his tongue in her mouth. I don't know. From my understanding, it happened during rehearsals. It was a scripted kiss. I don't know. I'm sort of thinking there's something really weird going on there. I'm just not sure about criminal charges arising out of that. It's like, couldn't she just have belted the crap out of him? I don't know. I really don't. I would have. But I'm a bit like that. Well, I wouldn't have belted the crap out of him because I couldn't belt the crap out of anybody because I've got no muscles. I should probably not go there. Everybody will say, oh, abusive woman. Still, no one's going to find this video anyway, so I don't care. But I'm still stuck on this. At what level does criminality kick in? At what level is it abuse? At what level? See, I didn't know what happened with the guy from, what's his name? Robert something from the show years ago. Everyone else knows the story but the actress who played his youngest daughter made complaints of serious sexual abuse, and he got convicted and jailed. He always maintained his innocence, but you sort of wonder, well, there are pedophiles and there are pedophile rings, and it does happen. So we just have to, where's the balance between supporting the victims and giving the accused the right to a fair trial and, to prove their innocence? It's really hard proving some of this stuff. It's, there's no evidence. You get caught out in lies. That's kind of what you rely on. Yeah, bloody hard. It's a shit system. And, we need lie detectors that work, because it'll work both ways. So, Now, I've read a couple of books about, calling on angels and demons to help you out. And I remember this one because it struck me as absolutely wonderful idea. So there's an angel, Rosaran, and if you call on this angel to help you with your legal problem, there's a disclaimer on it. They say, don't call on this angel to help you with your legal problem if you're guilty, because you get justice. You don't get the law, you get justice. So, you've got to be really, really careful calling on this angel, because if you did it, you're gone. And, of course, don't have to rely on the legal system for that. And it's really quite amazing how that often works out, that people do get their comeuppance in weird and wonderful ways when the law lets others down. But you don't often hear about it. It's one of those things. You really don't. We never know what goes on in other people's heads. And as I say, I don't like cancel culture. At the moment, we're cancelling people who hold a different opinion to us, or if we get offended by something they've said. I have a problem with that. I do have a problem cancelling people who have been found guilty of actual crimes, because, there's still value to some of the work they've done. And I mean, there are people who are benefiting off some of the crimes, which, horrible as it sounds, it's true. Historically, if you look back, there are lots of things that were discovered because people broke the law. Dr. Mengele comes to mind. He did horrific things, but moved medicine forward a fair bit. I mean, I shudder every time I think of that man. So, I'm not surprised at some of the reactions people are having. But, you sort of have to wonder, what else is happening. Because really, I'm trying to find the words. I wish I was more articulate with these concepts, because without talking about a specific case, because I think that doesn't help us when we're talking about the concept of, being outraged by the way the system works, and then just saying, no, we're going to shut down all conversations. And, from my reading of some of these stories about the response to Channel 7 daring to air or to even interview Craig McLachlan to get his side of the story. They want to cancel Channel 7. They want to punish Craig McLachlan, and I'm there. But the court found him not guilty on all counts. But you still want to punish him. That's what I've got a problem with. And I have a problem with people being hung, drawn and quartered for things where you sort of think, well, why are we making everything, minor offences are now this big thing where, go to jail for 3 years, do not pass go, do not collect $200. I think some of the punishments seem disproportionate for the offence. I just have a really hard time wrapping my head around this concept that we're now living in times where you can be so upset and offended that you can have all of these big reactions from people. The way that I initially became aware of the Craig McLachlan thing is I thought he'd actually raped this woman, and I'm sort of there, well, am I weird? Because, if it's a kiss, you just slap him on the face and say, don't ever do that again, mate. Next time I'll get you for assault. Don't do that. I know that everybody says he was in a position of power, but you know what? No bullshit. I call bullshit on that. Because even when your boss doesn't, there are things you do not put up with. I'm assuming this is the same woman who remained friends with him. I don't know. I know nothing. It's all good. I know nothing. I just get pissed off with everybody jumping on the bandwagon. I hardly ever go on Twitter because it just seems to be the place to get really offended about everything. Twitter cancelling the President of the United States kind of did not sit well with me, especially when earlier they said that the President of the United States could not block anyone from following him on Twitter. It's like, okay, so he's not allowed to block anybody, but you can get rid of his whole thing. And plenty of people voted for him. It's not like he got no votes and everybody hated him. But I don't agree with that. I think that is... And I think Twitter and Facebook are becoming the modern telephone. It's just a means of communication. And I think they should have to follow the Telecommunications Act rather than being their own little fiefdoms where they can do whatever they damn well please. There are people who only communicate through Facebook. There's a few people, I only talk to them on Facebook. I don't have their phone numbers. If I need them, I'll send them a message on Facebook and, we'll have a chat on there. So, I don't know. It's all weird. life's so hard now. I remember when I was a teenager, I would not be a teenager for quits now, because our laws were really simple. The rules were really simple. Until you were a certain age, you just did what you were told, or else, there'd be consequences. And now, the consequences might be you might lose your phone for a day, but that's all right. You've already bought a second one from all that pocket money you get. I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, I think that's enough of me ranting about it. Was justice served? I don't know. I don't really know. I will have a look at the judgment and, maybe make up my mind on that one. I certainly felt a lot of unease when I saw the interview and, the kinds of things that they were saying. It just didn't sit well with me. Yeah. Speaking as someone who suspects they're a narcissist, but I'm not sure. Some of his statements did seem a bit self-serving, but when I saw that, was it cringeworthy? Yes. Do I think it was a true reflection of who Craig McLachlan is? No, I don't think so. There would be a large element of it that would be him, but I think a lot of it was staged to present the story in the way that the producer wanted. I mean, I remember being made to sit in a chair reading a magazine with my cup of coffee. Now, I never did that, but they decided that that would be a really good look. And I'm there, I don't sit down and do that. Or they would make me, there were things that were staged and, how about you now walk out onto this and just gaze across the farm so that, and, you had to, if I'd been an actress, it could have been really good. And if I'd been a good-looking actress, that would have been even better. But, gaze across there and, forlorn or something. And it's just, it was so unnatural because that's not who I was. It's still not who I am. I still, I don't go out on the patio and go, it's just not me. But there were things that were, filmed, and then, we'll ask these questions and we'll get this answer. And then when they put it together in the end, it wasn't quite what we'd done. There was a lot of footage shot for a really short story. And the way that it was presented was really like, here's an idiot. We'll see how she goes. So when I do watch these interviews with my massive experience of, being interviewed for one show about our battle with the bank, I can tell you I look at interviews differently. When I watch these shows, I don't assume that everything's in sequence. I don't assume that the answer is the response to the question. I am open to the idea that, yes, people are saying things, but I may not have the context quite right. And I think that was my take home from this interview. So it triggered me in a way that I know we don't get justice in court, but I think he hasn't had justice in life. I think there were a lot of things that were unfortunate that should never have happened. I think he was just wrong place, wrong time. And for everybody who says, other actors don't have it happen to them, no, it just doesn't make the news as much because the the actors so accused aren't well known enough or, controversial enough. Craig McLachlan's been quite controversial for quite a time. So, would that have added to it? I guess so. I mean, the only thing I've ever known about him is what I've read in the media, and I didn't get a positive opinion of him right from when he was in Neighbours. I mean, I never used to watch Neighbours, so I actually didn't care. But, I just didn't have a good impression of him. So how long have we been manipulated? And, we're manipulated by all sorts of things. And, everybody's saying about, you've got to look at your biases. How many of these have we got because of something that was said in the media years ago that we've forgotten about? But it's still sitting in the back of our head, and every time something comes up about the person the story was about, or, I can tell you, I hate some people with a vengeance. And I don't know them. I've got no real reason to hate them other than I don't like the cut of their jib, the way that they present themselves in the media. Look at that stuck up, whatever. It's a failing that I will openly admit to, and I think we all do it. And I think it leads to issues in the legal sense. Do you really want to be judged by something that you said 10 years ago? A comment in a paper 10 years ago. Or there's people now losing their jobs over tweets they did as teenagers. And I'm there, what? If you're going to go back 10 years and crucify someone for their opinion 10 years ago, I think there's something wrong with you rather than them, especially when they've grown up and they've changed their mind. If you can't change your mind, what's the point? If you're going to be like, say people find this video, they get really offended about it because, I'm not digging into Craig McLachlan, I seem to be defending him, blah, blah, blah. And, I'm victim blaming. Then, are they going to start this massive campaign? Probably not. But they might start a small campaign and vilify me on Twitter and God knows where else, and really have a go and make my life miserable. It happened to this woman who had, I think she had 30 Twitter followers. Most of them were friends and acquaintances, and she got on a plane and she was flying to Africa, and she just tweeted out, because she had this weird sense of humour, and she tweeted out, I'm going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS. Oh, I won't get AIDS because I'm white. And it's, by the time she actually landed in South Africa, she'd lost a job. There were people waiting for her at the airport. When she turned the phone back on, once she was allowed to, when the plane had landed, everything went off. It was like so many notifications, and people had been trying to phone her to let her know what was happening. She didn't know. She didn't know that there was this massive uproar about this bloody tweet. And it was a joke. And I mean, I don't think I've said it right. It was a joke in really bad taste. But it was still a bloody joke. And, we used to have this thing where you just say, oh, God, that's awful. Don't do that again. I mean, some people, you just ban them from telling jokes because they're so horrible. I mean, I get offended at some jokes. But I just tell people to don't tell me that joke again or anything like it, because I really didn't like it. But I wouldn't go and cancel someone's life. And I mean, this literally ruined her life. So, we have a lot of power as individuals, and while some people can come back, someone who's got a reputation that is ruined and they've lost their job, blah, 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 they can sue for defamation and they can prove a loss. But in Australia, you have to prove a loss. So if you lose your job, but you can't quite blame whatever happened on a particular person, who are you gonna sue for defamation? If it was everyone on Twitter suddenly going off, and your boss decides that, well, that's pretty bad, I don't want anything to do with this person. That's, you can't really get them for defamation. You can't get the boss for defamation. Highly unlikely to win for unfair dismissal. It's just a losing battle. So I think what I'm getting at, and I have talked about it before, not sure if it was on this series or the last series, but you can get done for defamation if you are posting things that are, really bad and not true about someone. Sometimes you can get done for defamation even when you've got the defence of truth. But can you imagine, and everybody thinks you've got to do something wrong to be in court and have your life ruined. And I'm here to tell you, no, you don't. Your life can be ruined from a simple misplaced tweet or a comment on a Facebook page. And some of the people that can get themselves in trouble are people who've had a run-in with the law, who didn't like their lawyer, who then go on social media, name the lawyer, and say defamatory things about them. And it's really hard to prove that your lawyer really is a fuckwit who doesn't know their head from their backside, and that all of the allegations you're making against them, that they're all true. They didn't read a single document, they didn't do this and they didn't do that. So you could find yourself, after having a couple of wines, getting into an argument with your significant other, or your mum, or your dad, or your someone, or the dog tripped you up, and you spilt a very valuable glass of wine and had to clean that up, and had to crack open another bottle, so you drank the whole bloody thing, and then you're on Facebook and you're being a keyboard warrior, because you know what, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, who cares? And from that, you could find yourself in court being sued for defamation, because it doesn't have to be published in a newspaper. It's only got to be published to one other person, And if you ruin someone's reputation, you could get done for that. So, especially if you're talking about a lawyer or a barrister, or while you can make nasty comments about companies that employ, I think it's more than 25 people or more than 50 people, you can sort of go to town on them a bit. But you can't do it against their named employees. If you just say, their staff are idiots, that's a general thing. You might get away with it. You probably will. But if you've identified someone as being an employee of that firm, and they are, nasty, evil, wicked, they're a thief, whatever, and, they can show that you've defamed them, if they get black marks against their name, if suddenly they're not being given the work that they were being given before. If suddenly they're demoted and they can show, well, or they're not promoted. I know someone who was not promoted, and they showed that it was from the Facebook posts. It caused such an uproar that they were passed over for promotion because the people on the promotions panel had read some of these comments and thought, oh, that's not really good. So, you know, you can get done for it. And you might think, oh, you know, it's nothing, it's only defamation, won't cost a lot. Costs a mozza. All legal action costs a mozza. Even just getting an opinion on, you know, should you just settle or you're going to fight it. I have received a letter about, you know, a would-be defamation suit. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who came back a couple of hours later and said, well, that's really interesting. How about you read this? And the barrister who was going to sue me, I had his judgment in my hot little hands, and that judgment pretty much contained everything that I'd accused him of on my blog, where I said, you know, this barrister did X, Y, Z, and in a court they decided that, well, he did X, Y, Z, and, you know, I mean, he got suspended for what he did. He's no longer practicing as a barrister, but he decided to quit on his own, or at least I think he's not practicing anymore. I haven't looked him up recently, only because, you know, some things you let go. I wasn't overly impressed with his performance, and in this judgment that my lawyer sent me, I knew why, you know. But the first thing that my lawyer came back with is, well, I'm going to send them a letter saying, you know, he had a year to whinge about it, and the post was more than a year old. He harassed you to get it taken down. It was a campaign of harassment over hours, and you know, it was bullshit from start to finish. And we talked about money, how much it would cost, and it was pretty significant just to get to the first hearing. So thankfully, after receiving the letter, the barrister dropped it. But, you know, and don't ever think that the people who are suing you for defamation are going to self-represent or have very low costs. They're not. And they're going to hit you up for their legal fees as well. So it can be a pretty expensive exercise. So when you see something blow up on Twitter or Facebook, or you see something that triggers you from whatever your case is, can you resist the temptation to name names and shame people? If you've got, like, if you were one of the victims of Craig McLachlan, I would not sort of say, you know, oh, tell everybody on Facebook. No, keep it quiet. Don't interact with anybody about it, and go to the police and make a complaint. That's the only way forward. Did more people come forward? I mean, how bad was it? I don't know. It didn't seem, from my initial reading of the early reporting, it just seemed storm in a teacup. I could be wrong. How much star power is there? And I mean, I remember the Jeffrey Rush thing, and, you know, nothing came of that because, you know, he says, I didn't do it. And he won his defamation case. Look, it's all fraught. So, and apparently now you can't even give an opinion of why you think something isn't quite as bad as it's been made out to be, or to sort of say, you know, I think the hashtag #MeToo movement sucks, because you should be allowed to question. You must be allowed to confront your accuser. People can't just accuse you of shit and you've got to, suck it up, baby. That's not how the world works. And all I can say is thank God we are no longer living in, medieval times where, there would be swords at dawn or whatever. Take out, let's go to war over this, or assassinate people, or, I don't know. Anyway, I've probably ranted enough now. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to let you guys go. If anybody ever finds